Hello, I'm Odin, and it's not often that I get to do a requested prop that's a brand new prop. It's King Kong's axe, as seen in the trailer for Godzilla vs. Kong. I've made an axe based solely on a trailer before. Maybe this time I can put the handle on correctly. With this build, I'm going to use a heavy-duty cardboard tube for the handle. I don't remember where I got this tube, but the length is perfect, and it's not completely round, which is nice. I made some basic calculations looking at the Bandai toy pictures and figured out how big the Godzilla spines need to be. I kept thinking it would be bigger. Okay. I want to build this much like I did my Leviathan axe, where I'm going to take a battery and put it in the pommel and then make the axe head light up blue. Happens to be blue again. Only it's the whole Godzilla spine is glowing blue, which is kind of cool. And I'm going to use the same type of rechargeable tool battery. One of my 12-volt Milwaukee drill batteries. I just happen to have Milwaukee tools, so this is what I'm using. This isn't an endorsement or a sponsorship by Milwaukee. I just like them, so this is what I've got. The form factor also fits. It's a pretty good size compared to the tube. Now, when I did the last couple things using this type of battery, I just shoved connectors into the top, which works. It's hot wiring it effectively, right? But I was hoping there was something better, and there was. On Amazon, I can get an aftermarket battery receptacle. So this is specifically made to take this style of Milwaukee battery. And that's it. 12 volts come out here. Done. It's done for, this is made for homemade robotics and upgrading of remote control cars and things. I don't need this mounting bracket. I'm going to glue this into the end of the tube, and then the knuckle will come off, and that'll hide the battery and provide a reasonable counterweight for the axe. Pretty excited about this. I make some marks on the tube, which show me where to put the axe head and the power switch. I drill holes for the wires to poke through the tube, and I solder longer wires to the battery receptacle with bits of shrink tube over the connections, because I don't need to create a problem right away by letting the wires touch inside the tube and short circuit the lights. It's not obvious how to attach the battery, so I superglued a piece of heavy-duty foam to the receptacle, and then that fits inside of the tube. I apply a generous amount of superglue to the base of the plastic and the tube, and there's a little inside as well. And then I have some accelerant to speed up the superglue, because a 10-second set time is just not fast enough. I already have the wires weaved through the holes for the switch. Now I just need to pull them through the hole for the axe head. To install the switch, I cut the positive wire and solder in line a push-button switch from some old cheap flashlight. I carefully superglue the switch to the tube. Don't get any glue in the switch. Good. I should test it now that it's all glued together. There we go. And make sure that the LEDs I have will work. I push all the extra wire back into the tube. I don't need this much, but it's better to have more than to be a little short with this wire. Now, when was the last time that I had to do all the wiring before any part of the build? I used some sandpaper to really scratch up the plastic of the battery holder. That way the contact cement will stick to it. In this one shot of the trailer, you can see that the pommel end of his axe kind of looks like the classic cartoon bone. And what I want to do is build up a few layers of EVA foam up to and around the battery, even this little piece right here. Next, I glue down a section of 4mm thick EVA foam. And I grind down this one side to make it more of a gradual change of thickness, going from the handle up to the knuckle that will be on the end. Clean up all the dust, because it'll ruin the next layer if I don't. And then a second, longer layer of 4mm foam is added. And it's reduced down as well. And the final layer is a long piece of 2mm thick HD foam. Actually, this has all been HD foam. And it's really two pieces of foam, with the seams in line with the axe head. It's going to hang on the wall most of the time, so I place the seams where they'll be out of the way. I still grind down the seams to make them as clean as I can, and smooth out the layers on the battery end as well. I had put some tape over the switch just so I can keep the glue out of it. So there's a weird lump where the wire and the button is. I'm not worried about it because I have to have kaiju leather straps that are gonna go over this. So it's gonna be hidden anyway. There might still be a bump, but at least I'll be able to tell where it is. I need to do the ends. I need to make a spike and I need to make a knuckle. So I'll do the spike first because that's easier. For the core of the spike, I'm gonna use a piece of this heavy-duty kneeling pad. I cut the ends down so it'll fit into the end of the tube and super glue it in place. More grinding. I just use a coarse bit sanding drum to remove a lot of the kneeling pad foam, sculpting the spike shape. And it's not a perfect spike, it's a broken bone, so it's flatter on the sides and kind of jagged on the end. And chances are, when this axe is finished, the spike will get some abuse. So I'm going to skin over the foam center with a layer of 4mm What the Foam. That type of foam is very dense, and I won't be bothered if I set the axe down on the tip, leaning the rest up against the table. I sand the seams flat, and they're in line with the axe head as well. Then I start to texture the bone using a grinding stone. Lots of long scratches along the length of the bone, which looks good to me, but I know if I put on too much, then the bone could look really weathered, old, and rotten. I had a couple of seams pop open while sanding, so I just super glue them back shut, and I have a spiky end. To start the knuckle, I measure how much 10mm foam I'll need by wrapping a piece of scrap around the battery. So I cut a piece that'll not only wrap around the battery, but the length of it is about 10mm longer than I need. And I don't glue it into a perfect circle. I need a lump to match the rest of the bone. I press the end onto some soft craft foam, which gets me a pattern for cutting out a plug in 10mm thick HD foam. And that'll cap the open end and cover the battery. It's a really snug fit, and I can always glue a little Velcro to the bottom and put some on the battery if it doesn't hold that well later. I need a couple of spheres or other round objects for the bone on the end, and I decided to cut some imperfect circles, cutting them up and gluing them into a framework. And then I glue them onto the end of the axe. Now I could just use some foam balls, but those would be perfect spheres, and I want this to be lumpy and organic. I cut some pieces of 6mm foam that can cover over the framework. And I'm not trying to be perfect here. I want to avoid the Halloween store caveman bone look. A few more panels on the inside, and it's working, but it still has a few holes and some really bad seams. So I sand down the peaks and shape the sides a little bit better. I also thin down the cut edges of the foam, just like on the main bone, because I want to add a layer of 2mm foam, which will cover over all the big seams and fill in some of the cracks. Now I still have a couple of small seams, but it's way better than it was. Everything is just glued on with contact cement. And there's a final round of sanding and grinding on the knuckle itself. Then I make the edges on both parts the same size. I'm going to have a big seam here, not sure how to reduce that and allow a 12-volt battery to be removed and recharged. What I want to do now is I'm going to take some Alex Fast Dry and I'm going to smooth it over all the really bad exposed cracks. And I'm going to fill it in and set this down in front of a fan and let the fan dry out the Alex Fast Dry even faster while I make the rest of the parts. So fast dry first, and then I can start making the dorsal fin. So to make the axe head, which appears to be a spine off of Godzilla's back or another Godzilla-like creature, I'm going to use a foam called Plastazote. This is, as far as I know in the United States, this is available through TNT Cosplay. Fine folks, I've met them and talked to them, they're great people. Don't be afraid to order from them. Plastazote is unique in foams, at least in EVA style foams. This isn't technically EVA, in that it is translucent. So I can take a light source and put it behind it and it glows. Now this isn't the only foam that does that. There's that shipping foam that I've used before, but this has got a super fine texture and a uniform texture, much like EVA foam, unlike that shipping foam that I've used before, which is what, polyethylene or whichever it is. I'm gonna make the spines out of this. I'm gonna do multiple layers so I can dig a texture into it. I'm gonna backlight it with blue LEDs, just like the Leviathan axe, and this is gonna be cool. When I measured the bone, I also got the size of the spine, which gives me a paper pattern to work from. Now here's the crazy thing. This doesn't look very big. This actually really bothered me with the size that it was, because that's not Godzilla's spine, that's not big enough. But you know, it starts to become axe-sized, so I suppose. It still seems to be like it should be bigger, but I look at that image and it's like, no, that's about right. It's upside down, whatever, it's like this. I trace the pattern onto the Plastazote. I'm using a pencil so I won't have any ink problems later when I paint it. I cut out 2 pieces. I stack them together so I can cut both of them out at the same time. Then I cut out 2 more pieces, but these are slightly smaller than the first pair. And then I cut 1 more that's even smaller and simpler than the last set. And the idea is I'm going to stack them together with the LED lights wrapped around the center layer. There are 2 parts to the spine, so it looks like it goes through the bone and a little sticks out of the backside. I think I'm going to build the small one first because it'll take less time if something goes horribly wrong. My LEDs are a roll of blue color 12-volt LEDs. And they have a clear weatherproofing on them, which is just some bulk that I don't need. Typically, this clear stuff just peels right off without any problems, but this time it took some of the important bits with it. I test the strip just to make sure it's okay. No, there's some that I've killed. Oh, that sucks. Now I need to figure out which sections no longer light up and remove them. I can wrap the short sections that work back around the inner core of the small piece, but I have to solder in some wire jumpers to reconnect the strips because of the missing pieces. I have 3 little strips on here, so I can get a number of LEDs on both sides of the foam piece. And they work just fine. Hey. All right. I add some wire to pull power from the larger side because I plan to connect everything on that side. I take a set of the middle-sized parts and spread some contact cement onto them. And I let the contact cement mostly dry, and then I can stick the pieces over the LEDs. Now, I didn't actually apply any contact cement to the LEDs directly because they're going to be encapsulated, so I don't need to chance that the wet cement will wreak havoc on the LEDs. Now I can spread more contact cement on the larger pieces and each side of the center layers. I stick them together, squeezing the sides shut so I can get a decent dimensional look to the spine. The foam edges don't smash that flat. I had actually carved an angle into each edge before gluing them together. Very subtle. That cuts down the light a lot. It still glows. It's still glowing. That definitely cuts down the light. That's okay, because I'm going to cut grooves in it and the grooves will light up, and that's what I'm going to want. I'm happy with the small side, so I start to carve the sides for the larger spine pieces. Now these are more complicated, they're a little more challenging to do. And then it's back to peeling the weather stripping off of the LEDs, but this time I take it slow. It's going to be faster overall if I'm just more careful now and peel slowly than to remove bad spots and have to reconnect all the wires later. Okay, that's all? Is that enough? That's not enough. Okay, good. Haven't broke any. Now that I have one complete strip, I can just wind it around the center layer and cut notches on the ends of the foam if needed, so I don't waste an LED by having it shine directly towards the cardboard tube. There we go. Yeah. Good. So much better when you don't break the LEDs before you put them on. That went a lot faster. Okay. I carefully remove as much of the excess foam as I can, because less bulk to cover is, well, less bulk. I just put contact cement all around the edges this time. No glue on the LEDs, because I don't need it there on the foam. But the outer layer is fully covered in contact cement. I suppose that, technically speaking, this is changing the color of the blue light by adding in a small amount of the caramel color that's the glue. But I'm not worried about that at all. I still like to test the lights every time a new step happens, though. Always scary when it suddenly doesn't work. Oh, it's because I got it hooked up backwards. Well, that would do it. Yeah, all right. Well, that's fine. It glows great out this side. The lights work. And is the size of the parts right? Oh, that doesn't look bad. It separated and always looked too small. That doesn't look too small. That looks fine. Okay, good. Now there's a deep texture on the back spines of Godzilla, and I try an idea with using an edge of the grinding bit to see if I can control it enough to make that texture. I liked what I was seeing, so I grind away at the smaller piece first, just to be sure. And when I get to the big one, I can follow the contours of the spikes and the spines, around the corners, and keep a consistent distance between the lines of the texture. It only took me about 20 minutes to etch this texture into both spikes, and the Plastazote carves with the rotary tool really well. I've got the texture done. I'm really happy with this at this point. What I need to do is start to paint it, even though it's not glued yet. But these are painted differently from the rest of the axe, so there's a couple of things I want to do to it first. And the main thing is give it some blue while the light's off. It's going to be important that it has a little bit of that glow, even if the lights aren't on, because it's going to spend most of its time turned off. So what I'm planning on doing is just doing a bit of spray paint around the edge. I did a really quick, dirty test here, and I'm glad to see that Plastazote doesn't melt under spray paint. I didn't know that for sure, and now I do that. At least this small dusting isn't enough to cause a problem. So I'm going to go lightly spray the outside. I'm going to leave as much of the middle white as I can, and I can move on. I'm using stained glass spray paint. I hope it'll still glow when the lights are on. And I really only want to do the edges. I want the center to stay white. I'm so happy that doesn't melt. All right, so I got a bit of a blue. It might be able to be a little darker, but that's not bad, that's not bad. It'll glow blue too. So, the back of the spines are flat and the bone is round. So I cut some wedges from the same thick floor mat foam. Contact cement will glue them to the spines with space for the wire to poke out between them. Then carefully trim them to the shape of the spine. Yeah, there we go. To make it easier on myself, I solder some lead wires coming from the LEDs on the big spine. It's easier to do this now without the wedges already attached. I was sure to hook them up correctly this time, and I'm using red for positive. And I trimmed the extra from the big spine as well. Now they're ready to glue to the handle. I am actually jumping ahead a little bit. I need to put the texture on the bone. I'm getting all excited about attaching the axe head because I'm getting somewhere. It's going to become the thing. But I need to put this texture all down here, or it's just going to be a bat. So, where's the Dremel? Even before that, I need to sand this. Boy, details. The Alex Fast Dry Flexible Spackle has had plenty of time to dry. I can start sanding with a sanding sponge. It doesn't take very long to do, and it's such an organic, rounded shape, I pretty much have to do all this just by hand. There are a few glue seams that still stick out and kind of fuzzy, so I have my rotary tool set at 50% speed, and they clean up really well. I change grinding bits to one that has a sharp corner, and with a light touch, I use that corner to carve fine lines into the bone. Now the length of the bone is longer than I can easily carve in one single stroke, so I slowly patchwork 3 sections with all the lines being as parallel as I can make them. I continue the texture up to the joint, but I keep the rounded parts smooth, no marks on them at all. I clean all the dust off, and now I can glue. At the same time that this spike is glued on, the wires need to pass through the bone, but just hoping that they'll make it through both holes is pretty optimistic. So I tape the end of a drinking straw into a point. I push the straw through the bone and cut the point off. Now it's easy to feed the wires through the straw, and the straw will push out of the way while gluing the parts together. With all the wires meeting here, I can solder them together pretty easily. Notice there's a shrink tube over some of the wires already. After the connections are made, I can slide the tube over them and shrink it so it can't move or short circuit. Then I glue up the big spine and force all the wires back inside of the bone. The axe is mostly built, but before I can wrap the kaiju hide strips over it, I need to paint it some more. Using some open cell foam, I sponge paint black around the edges of the back spines. I add a little bit of black over the main glowing part as well, but I keep the center white. Yeah. Oh wow, that works so much better. Contrast helps so much. Yeah, I like that. That's great. I use a brush to really fill in the edges of the back spine. The solid black color looks better, and the blue light doesn't really glow there anyway. Then I continue to paint the entire bone black. It's just a base coat, and I did it in 2 stages. I let the paint dry, then I went back and painted the part that I was holding. To color the bone, I'm going to do more sponge painting. I'm trying to not fill in the grooves that I cut into the bone. I just want to paint some brown over the high spots between them. Then I mix a slightly lighter color and cover most of the bone. I don't want to paint near the spines. Then mix up a lighter shade and still only really paint towards the ends. I left the bigger section of darker on the grip. I did 5 mixes of paint up to the joint and the broken bit on the other end. And then I continued to mix lighter colors, but just painting the smooth parts of the bone. The last step was nearly white and just a little bit on the ball of the bone. I had also lightened the bone portion of the broken end, the rotten marrow. I left a dark color. I think I'm pretty good with that, but I still need to make the kaiju leather that goes on the wrap that actually holds the spine to the wood. I just wanted to do this spreading, stippling, sponge painting process before I put that on, so I didn't have to worry about not painting it. I imagine that makes sense. But of course the reality is I haven't even made it yet. So let me set this aside where it can dry and not stick to something, I hope, and we'll get that happening. I cut a large piece of 2mm HD foam to make the leather wrap. To simulate the leather or hide texture, I mashed the foam with a wad of aluminum foil. Now this sort of works. I probably should have heated up the foam before I started. The second stage I wanted to try is to flip the foam over, so the side that has the texture is now face down. Then take the rounded end of a paintbrush handle and just dimple the foam. In the movie trailer and on the toy, I can see a bumpy texture on the wraps. I also go back and hit it again for a second time with a smaller brush handle. The trick is not to stab the foam and make holes, but just to mash it enough to deform it. I end up with a texture on the foam. It's not as dramatic as I was hoping for, but it's something. Next, I cut it into strips, and I freehand it so it's purposefully wavy. I really do not want straight lines. I have gray strips, so I mix up a similar color to the bone, but redder, which is kind of what I see on the toy. And I paint the tops of all the strips. I also paint the thin sides, because I need all the angles that you're going to see to be painted, or we're going to see some gray foam peeking out from the sides of the strips. I ruin a throwaway brush by adding a second layer of a darker color. And after both of those dry, I mix a lighter color and try to just highlight the bumps on the strips. To glue the strips to the axe, I'm using super glue, and only in select spots. I really don't need to fully cover the back with glue. I make sure to crisscross the spines and make them really look like that they're lashed onto the bone. I saved my 3 longest strips to wrap down the handle and up to the spike. Again, only super gluing when I need to. I wrapped right over the power button, but I need to cut out some of that foam, because this will give space for the button to work and it won't be mashed flat all the time. A single wrap of hide covers the button, and it still works just fine. And for a final bit of color, I painted the shadows around the wraps with some liquid shoe polish, just enough to darken the wrinkles. Most of the materials I used for this project I picked up locally. I put a list and some links in the description. I've got King Kong's axe. This thing is really cool. And thinking about it, I think this is the first time I've made any kind of piece of Godzilla. That's oddly enough not something I've done before. I don't think I've ever made a puppet or anything else. So this is it. This is the first time I've made anything for that. That's kind of fun. I'm really happy I have another axe that lights up and glows blue like the Leviathan axe, because I think that's just such a good look. And something that I feel is important to point out that I had noticed while watching the trailer and working on this, when Kong gets a hold of the axe and gets angry, the bone starts to glow red. So the bone itself should also glow red, not just Zilla's spines. I think maybe the spine only glows when it's close to Zilla, and when Kong's pissed, the bone glows, but mine glows blue. So there we are. It's done. I'm happy with it. And I know that there's going to be lots of different ways that you can make King Kong's axe from Godzilla vs. Kong. But this is how Odin makes. Why do I feel like all I've really done is made an inappropriate accessory for the back of my truck? I want to thank Michael McLean, Roland Ballou Jr., and all of my Patreon supporters. My Patreon support is the #1 thing that makes this show possible. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe. Have an idea for something for me to make? Please leave a comment below. And if you make any of these projects, you can send me a picture.